Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Mid-Sussex District Council Cabinet. I'm going to start by reading the safety announcement before we get into the main meeting. The building fire alarm signal is a continuous two-tone alarm. On hearing the evacuation alarm, leave the building by the nearest marked exit route. Follow the signs to the assembly point, which is the large staff car park opposite the entrance to the building. Anyone who cannot use the stairs will be helped by officers present after other people have left. Do not return to the building until told it is safe to do so by an authorised officer. If I could remind everyone, the whole of the council site is a no smoking area. This is a meeting of the Cabinet. I'm Councillor Jonathan Ash-Edwards, Leader of the Council. To my right and in front of me are members of the Council's Cabinet, and to my left are members of the Council's management team who will be supporting us during the agenda. I'd also like to welcome Paul Owens and Rachel Coon from BOP Consulting, who are going to be assisting us with the report on Clare Hall. So welcome and thank you for being with us. The first item on the agenda, item 1, to receive declaration of interest from members in respect of any matter on the agenda. Are there any declarations, colleagues? No, thank you. Item 2, to receive any apologies for absence. We have apologies today from Councillor Webster. Item 3, to confirm the minutes of the meeting from the 26th of September, which are in our packs. Colleagues, if I could ask you to vote as to whether you're happy to agree that those are an accurate record of that meeting, please. Thank you. Those minutes are agreed. Item 4, to consider any items that agrees to take as urgent business. I'm not aware of any. So that takes us to item 5, Clare Hall report of the investigation of investment options for the site, and the report is going to be introduced by Rafael Hayner, the interim head of organisational development. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I'm joined today by specialists from BOP. Paul is the co-founder and the director of BOP, and Rachel is associate director who led on this work. BOP were the Council's lead creative economy advisor who led this phase of work. Following the residents' engagement and consultation on the future of Clare Hall site, the Cabinet agreed in December last year to explore an ambition of securing investment for sustainable community facilities on the site. The Cabinet agreed to use data-driven approach and established member steering group to guide this work. This work has now been completed and the outcomes and recommendations are presented in the report. In very short, we know that the market is extremely difficult to deliver projects of this nature, but we wanted to thank multiple experts who engage with us in this work and help us understand the challenges and opportunities. And this helped us shape the final recommendation, and these are based on BOP's recommendations. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And I think we've got some questions we probably want to put on the report before we get into our debate, but really welcome the report and thank you for the work that's gone into it, because I think it does give us a really solid evidence-driven approach for us to take forward. Perhaps, if I could start with the first question, perhaps if I could ask what the response of the experts that have been consulted have been, particularly on the success criteria and objectives of the project.
Thank you, Chairman. I would say generally very positive. They felt it was really achievable, the success criteria that had been laid out. I think overall the thing that probably came out the most was they were also really appreciative of the effort and the consideration that had already gone into it by the council, and I think that was key because it set the tone, I suppose, for the beginning of that engagement with those partners and with the sector, and they were really positive about that.
Great, thank you. Councillor Demir, question.
Thank you, Rachel. Hi. Yeah, can you tell me a bit more about the current state of the sector? I know these are challenging times, but we must always look forward, and I wonder if you had any update.
Thank you, Councillor Demir, for that question. The current state of the sector overall, I would say, is the sector's sort of very strongly feeling the effects of COVID. I heard someone, a leading cultural director, say last week that it's sort of crouching. You know, it's kind of feeling. Yes, it's sort of crouching just to sort of survive at the moment. It's in survival mode, I would say. Now, obviously, it's been greatly helped across the country by the Cultural Recovery Fund. You remember, £1.6 billion hasn't all been spent yet, and that's helped people get by and helped to kind of make up for the huge loss of revenue they've had, particularly from the box office. So there is that sort of sense of there being still in a state of shock, still kind of in that mode of waiting for recovery, waiting to spring. The sort of other side of that story, I would say, is that in spite of those difficulties across the country during the sort of height of COVID from sort of 2020 to sort of 6 months ago, particularly smaller, locally based cultural organisations really came into their own because people got a sense of their relevance to their lives. What seems to be the case in the future, sort of looking to the future, is that there's going to be, in the future, people are going to be looking for cultural experiences and cultural participation closer to home, if you like. So it's a sort of mixed story, isn't it? There's a story of kind of crisis and stress, but also a story of potential there somewhere. But very difficult to predict the future, I'd say.
But people don't want to go on home, and of course the cost of petrol is going to make people look.
That's we have to be a little bit careful. There's no sort of, we haven't got a huge evidence base for that yet, but that seems to be the suggestion from the people we speak to in the sector, that there's this growing demand for sort of locally based facilities, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. Councillor Hillier.
Thank you, Leader, and also echo the Leader's comments about your report. It's a really good report, and thank you very much for the work. And also, I wholeheartedly agree with this strategy of going out to the market, giving some clear steers, but basically nothing in's, nothing out. But as you'll be aware, this is a massively important project for this council, for the residents, and particularly as this is a public meeting. I wonder if you could just, and you probably slightly addressed some of them in the previous question, but what do you think are the key risks around this whole project moving forward, please?
Yes, thank you. I mean, I think as we've outlined in the report, the economic and funding climate are absolutely crucial to the success of the project. And economic climate, in terms of its current volatility, it's unpredictable, and even from the point at which we submitted a draft of this report, I think to today, there's obviously been seismic changes. I think that combined with the funding climate, you know, at the moment we know that a lot of the funding that was available pre-pandemic from trusts and foundations, that money now is going into really securing and firming up existing cultural organisations. There's not a huge pot of money available for new projects. We know most of the capital funds have closed. And it's a challenging funding environment in terms of looking for any sort of philanthropic support. We did speak during the project to some commercial investors who were a little bit more optimistic, particularly if they got their funds from things like pension pots, but I think they were all healthily, you know, they were cautious. There was money, but they were all quite cautious. I think the other really clear steer we got was how you bring the opportunity to market, that's going to help you to mitigate a number of those risks as well. And I think doing that, steered by someone ideally who's got a good national reach, but also someone who really understands cultural organisations and can perform the due diligence you need to make sure you have a viable candidate or organisation in front of you, I think will be really important. And that might be a case of working with a larger organisation that has that national reach and encouraging them to subcontract to a smaller expert who can advise on perhaps that cultural due diligence. I think making sure that your protections are in place to make sure that a commitment on that site to a cultural community facility is there. It's going to be really important. And again, getting advice on how to do that so that that's baked in and locked in is going to be critical. And I think then finally just making sure that you're really aware and keeping your finger on the pulse of what else is happening. We've given you a snapshot in time, I suppose, of what's happening locally, culturally, and in terms of those facilities. I think it's going to be important just to make sure that you keep abreast of what else is happening within the district and within the region, so that you can plan accordingly and there's no risk of cannibalisation or stepping on the toes of another organisation.
Thank you. I particularly noted your comment around due diligence about people and interested parties. I think it's something we should bear in mind. Very valid. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cromie.
Great. Thank you, Rachel, for the really detailed report. What would you say are the key success factors to deliver culture-focused projects in the current climate?
Thank you. I think absolutely engaging the local community is going to be critical, and making sure that any development that goes in on that site is responsive and answers community need and demand. And I think that's going to be absolutely essential. I think that's what's really interesting about this, taking the opportunity to market in a really open way and getting the prospective partners that might be bringing something onto that site to really demonstrate, A, how they meet local need and demand, but B, how they're going to represent a level of flexibility in their spaces. And when I say that, I don't just mean physical walls and space and physical spaces, but actually, are they an organisation that's independent enough and to have the autonomy to actually work with the community and respond to community needs? And I think there's a risk if you opt to partner with a really large, chain cinema, for instance, that they may not have that autonomy to be able to respond in that flexible way that the community is going to need. So I think that that's what I'd be doing, is looking for someone really independent and someone who can really demonstrate how they tap into and engage with the community.
Thank you. Councillor Belsey.
Thank you, indeed. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Paul, for the report. Really interesting and really good as well to see the case studies as examples of things that you've been involved with elsewhere and how centres have developed elsewhere in the country. You just touched on the flexibility point, which we've got a wide range of residents' views in Haywards Heath and beyond of people who'd like to see it as maybe something in particular, specific, whether that's, a theatre, cinema, or some other space. But you have emphasised, again, just flexibility of space. I was just wondering what exactly you mean by having flexible, I think you say flexible, multifunctional and future-proof spaces. And the other concern I've got just with those, which I hope you'll be able to address through case studies, etc., is just whether sometimes they may be a bit anodyne or sort of trying to be all things to all people. You lose some of the sort of compelling characteristics that attracts people out in the first place. So I just wonder if you might be able to follow up on that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is always a risk that you don't want to end up with a space that's just a series of rooms, and that needs to be guarded. You have to be guarded against that. I think that's where making sure that any organisation coming in is meeting a really robust success criteria, and we've talked about building out the success criteria that you've got in there. You don't want to get overly specific with the success criteria, but I do think you want to really talk about what impact you want to see through the success criteria. And I think being very clear about that impact is going to make sure that you end up with an organisation coming in that's very focused and is committed to a set of shared focuses with you. I think that in terms of that, is it something for everyone? I think actually you need to be bold and say, no, it's not necessarily going to be something for everybody, but we are going to listen to the community and make sure that we're catering to a healthy proportion of it. And I think that's really important. And I think it's important to think about how you engage with the community to find that out. And I think probably the providers coming in and putting in those proposals will be doing that and should be demonstrating creativity in how they do that, because they're going to be needing to reach maybe parts of the community that haven't already spoken up, ones that perhaps don't have a platform and aren't as loud. And I think engaging and really finding out within the community what they need and what they want is going to be absolutely critical. Obviously, whatever goes in there also needs to be viable in the longer term, and I think that's going to be a key driving factor. We shouldn't make any bones about it. So I think for me, you want to be looking at what's the primary use of that space, and therefore, you know, how that makes it viable. Then you need to have a mixture of uses which underpins that viability. And in the report, we've got case studies where we spoke to people who had done things like retrofitting spaces and putting kitchens in that hadn't worked, and therefore their food and beverage offer wasn't financially supporting the offer, or their hire spaces weren't designed in a way that properly supported the offer. So I think making sure that you've got really high quality other flexible use of spaces is going to be absolutely critical to underpinning the viability. But we also spoke to people who were talking about really interesting things that they could do to support, that created really flexible spaces for the community. So whether or not that was having very flexible hire policies, or having programs or staff members who were actually out there and were tasked with public engagement, or right through to, we spoke to one organisation was talking about, they were an independent cinema, and they were saying that, you know, they've got flexibility to design their cinema spaces in a way that actually the screen can be moved out and you can use the space for performances. So it was just really exciting to hear the different solutions. So I think absolutely guard against it's something for everyone and it's too bland. And I think that due diligence piece should look at that and make sure that they feel like it's a really compelling proposition that the partner's putting forward. But equally, I think there are lots of exciting sort of flexible uses, and we see this happening in cultural organisations, you know, across the country. And if anyone's going to find a really exciting and flexible way to use a space, it's going to be a cultural or arts organisation, I guarantee it. So, but I think that due diligence piece will help with that on both fronts. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Salisbury.
Yes, thanks. I'm not certain whether this is a Rachel one or a Paul one. I've started off very cautious as this programme started to emerge, and as it's gone ahead and the input from the council and from yourselves, I've become more and more confident in what I can see will be achieved in the future. I'm kind of throwing my mind forward several years, and I'm just wondering whether it is you or whether it's an operator that answers the question about disposable income. So a lot of this is around how we actually manage something onto the site, and that is something that's suitable for the community and will be an exciting venture years and years out. That, of course, requires people to be attending. And we know, you referred earlier, that even now, you know, there's sort of some turmoil around on what's going to happen to the pound in people's pockets. Can you just try and explain to me how you approach that in terms of, are you expecting an operator that's coming in to demonstrate how they're going to attract people to part with the money, to use the site? Because my concern is that disposable income is fragile, and I don't know if there's an algorithm which says actually we can climb out of this and in 5 years' time everyone will have that much to spend, or whether you're waiting for an operator to demonstrate that to you. Thank you.
Perhaps I'll start this and then Paul can join in. So I think we know that there is an evidence base that shows particular arts organisations, cultural organisations and cultural providers and how they fared through past economic crises or turmoil. So for a start, anyone doing due diligence on anyone that's presenting a proposal for that site will be able to look to that historic evidence as a starting point, I think. So that's part of the answer. The second part, I would say, is that absolutely they need to be demonstrating how they intend to get those audiences in, whether that's through the programming, through the marketing, through strategies to make what they're doing more affordable. And ideally, I think you should be looking for someone that's got some form of track record and has an ability to demonstrate that. That might be that they're an organisation that have already got a venue, or they're moving venues and can demonstrate it, or it might be that it's a really skilled team that have done exciting things before and can demonstrate that. So I think those are probably part of the answers. And I think the other element I'd be looking for them to demonstrate is also where they are going to be getting any money from. So if they are a non-for-profit cultural organisation, which might not be the case, but if that is the case, you'd also be wanting to look at what's their plan, you know, where are they getting their money from, and how long-term, how secure in the long term are those sources of income. And I think that's where that due diligence piece comes in, looking at any organisation. I'm pleased to hear that our report has built some confidence, but I would continue to say be cautiously optimistic. I think it's a really, really tough time to be embarking on a project like this. But I think that's where that due diligence piece comes in, and supporting, supporting any organisation that puts forward a proposal to make sure that, they don't want to be there if they're not going to be viable, and you don't want them there if they're viable. And I think that due diligence piece is for both parties as much as it is for protecting yourselves. Yeah. Paul, I don't know if you've got anything to add. No.
Thank you, Councillor Demir.
Thank you. Really, probably following on from what Councillor Salisbury, I wasn't quite sure of one thing. You talk about an independent cultural anchor tenant. Not quite sure what you mean by that. I know what I mean by that, but I'm not sure what. But also you say use of a broker seeking such a cultural and a commercial property agent. Now, are we looking at, because I think when I discussed it with Raf, he was saying about it would be a broker or a property agent in consultation with a cultural consultant. So I just wonder if you explain the whole thing to me, just very briefly.
Yeah, of course. So in answer to your first question about independence, I think how independent an organisation is probably up to interpretation. What I would say is that you should be looking for someone who's independent, who can demonstrate that they're independent enough to have the autonomy to engage with the community. Right. When I was talking about that flexing to community needs. So that's what I'd be looking for. And it might be that they do have a chain of something, I don't know, but you would want very good evidence that they have that autonomy to engage with the community on a real site-specific basis. So in terms of who we would encourage you working with going forward, so what we talked about was for Model 1, which was the idea of simply bringing a cultural anchor tenant into the existing buildings and activating them. You could do that with someone we would call a broker. So that is a cultural specialist who will have a really good reach within the cultural and art sector and will be able to find you an anchor tenant and bring them in. If you're looking at option 3, where you're actually looking for a mixture of partners, we would suggest using a commercial agent, and they will be able to pull together through that national reach that I talked about. They'd be able to pull together people that could put proposals in who would be in partnerships with each other. So you might have a cultural organisation within that, plus a developer who might have other commercial partners who can bring together a group of different organisations that can make use of that site. So those are the two different groups. I would suggest if you're putting we're progressing both Model 1 and 3 at the same time, that you could possibly look at actually getting the commercial agent to subcontract that specialist bit, and that they subcontract that broker themselves. So you're dealing with one point of contact, but that they have that expertise in-house, which is going to be required, I think, to really make sure that that cultural bit is really interrogated, that it's going to deliver on your success criteria, and that they're going to be viable in the longer term as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hillier.
Thank you. I had two questions, but happily one of them, Councillor, was very similar to Councillor Demir. So the other question, I think it was raised in answer with something you said to Councillor Belsey, and I completely agree that this can't be something for everybody here, but sometimes we're talking about buildings, sometimes we're talking about site. We know that also on the site we've got users such as church, scouts, and until recently nursery. Obviously, for me, the economics is essential. For me, the taxpayer has to be protected. But do you still feel that there is potential for those uses or something to be accommodated to support those kind of organisations on the site, as well as the cultural element?
So I think it would depend on what is going on to that. And I wouldn't want to talk for anybody putting forward a proposal for that site. But from the people that we spoke to, they would see having a group of people or groups in the area who are keen to hire or use spaces is only an asset. They're really interested in having a local community who are already attached to that site and the buildings on that site and being able to continue a relationship with them. So they saw that certainly as a positive. And again, if you wanted to be any more robust about that, I don't really foresee a reason why you couldn't build that into your success criteria as you take that to market. entirely up to you, but I didn't anticipate any huge pushback. So nobody was in any way concerned about any of the groups, or if anything, saw it as an asset.
Okay, thank you.
So the options we've got, the models we've got here, sorry, I think are quite clear. I think the one that perhaps does cause a bit of confusion is model 1, in terms of just being really clear about what you mean by that, and how that model might be assessed, because obviously, refurbishment means different things to different people. And we've obviously looked at in the interim report, at the property report, and the level of work that would need to be done, not to do any improvements, just to bring it to, up to a current standard. So could you just clarify for us what you would see that model 1 requiring in terms, because potentially actually it's quite a big remodelling of the building as much as a refurbishment, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we should be very clear to say this is not a lick of paint. This is still going to be substantial investment for Model 1. You can see from the property report what they're saying is required there, plus whatever anyone would want to put in there in order to make a real impact from the site and to deliver on the success criteria. So you'd still be hoping that in Model 1 that they'd be able to deliver on the success criteria, and that's going to take some investment of opening up Clare Park, for instance, making that really great first impression from that site. So I think it is less capital investment than would be required for Model 3, substantially less, but it is much more than a lick of paint.
Thank you. It's useful to clarify. And I suppose we just to kind of wrap up on these questions, there may well be some others as we get into the discussion, but could you just, if you're just summarising, what do you see as the strengths of this project?
I mean, straight from the bat, the site, the day we arrived on that site, you could see that site is an absolutely fantastic site and a fantastic location. So that was probably our first impression. And then as we went on in the project, I think actually, the audiences, you have, the absolute best audiences you could want. And when you look at the type of audiences you have here, when we look at segmentation models for them, and we've detailed that in the report, any arts organisation would want those 3 segments on their doorstep, and you have that here. And that's a huge asset. As well as, that there is clearly an active community presence here that's interested in this site, and who we spoke to said that was really brilliant as well. They already had a head start, and they weren't going to be having to try and turn attention to the site because community already connected to it, and that's fantastic too.
Great, thank you. Councillor Salisbury.
Yes, thanks. This may seem a silly point, but I don't think it is. We've had a number of local groups, as you know, who've said, why can the council not allow them to take the site on? And they will run it at sort of nil cost to the council. When I see figures like 2.9 million to refurbish it, that kind of sounds like out of the league of some local group taking it on. In your opinion, would that be viable, that somebody, as smaller groups, could build an evidence base to show that they could refurbish and manage the building? Have you seen that in other areas where people have managed to do that?
I would say, look, it's a difficult challenge. That's a huge amount of money to raise, but it's not impossible. And I think, the idea of being able to pursue Models 1 and Model 3 leaves that opportunity open. If there is a group and they're either an existing group or they want to form some sort of form of trust or something similar, absolutely, it should be within their ability to do so. There are really great support organisations out there who will support community interest companies, trusts, community interest groups in helping them to develop their proposals and put them forward, help them build their business cases, help them understand how to do the fundraising. And there's also, incredibly talented people in the community who already have those skills themselves. So do I think it's impossible? Absolutely not. I think for any group, it will be difficult coming from, if they're starting from dot, in this climate to raise the money. It'll be challenging for any group, but certainly not impossible. And I think they would stand as good a chance as anyone else if they take those resources that are available to them.
Yeah, that's 1 and 3 then, is that it leaves the number 1 option, if you like, open to local groups to take part in this process. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much for that. Chloe, should we turn then to the main report and the recommendations from the next steps, and I'll open up for any comments or questions on that before we go to the recommendations. Councillor Belsey.
Thank you, Chairman. Only just, I see that the recommendations themselves don't have a timeline to them. I know paragraphs 34 to 36 do talk about bringing a report back to us after Christmas, so I was just highlighting that in case anybody hadn't seen those. So obviously I hope it will be early in the new year after Christmas, as I'm very keen, I'm sure the rest of my colleagues are as well, to build on the great work from the BOP report, and excited to see what the future might hold for the site, and get the tender process underway as soon as possible, recognising the point that Rachel made earlier as well about keeping the space flexible and encouraging that cultural sector to come forward with some inspiring ideas for our residents and ourselves. So I'm very happy to support the recommendations, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Hayner, is there anything you just want to add, just some timescales for the next steps for us?
Thank you, Chairman. Absolutely right, Councillor, you're right. You know, we want to bring it as quickly as possible, subject to cabinet decision today. We're going to go and seek, if it's a positive, we're going to go seek a specialist advice and onboard them as quickly as possible, and start working on developing the brief, which brings a bit of more detail to what we have in a success criteria, but not to over design it or over develop it, and bring it back after Christmas, as close to Christmas as possible.
Thank you. Councillor Hillier.
Thank you, Leader. I've got two questions or comments. The first one, it is semantics, and obviously I've kind of mentioned it before, and in the report, para 6, so the first page at the bottom, where it says the Council recognises that combining a variety of uses may offer the best opportunity to make any cultural leisure offer viable. I've always kind of sought to have something like the word preeminent in there. I think we all understand that our desire is that, you know, the main function of that site is to provide a quality leisure and or cultural space. And I just want that to be really, really clear, because there are some people out there, for whatever reason, may go, oh, they're going to do this, and there'll be a tiny little bit of leisure space. I want comfort that the officers and everybody is clear that the key function of what is going on to this site is going to be able to provide a really good cultural leisure offer, please. That's my first question.
Thank you. Absolutely right, Councillor. You're absolutely right, and this is why I think Rachel explained us what the concept of anchor tenant, the culture anchor tenant. This is what the ambition is, to bring a community kind of focused anchor tenant that can, you know, develop the site in a way that, you know, community welcomes it, and this is absolutely the ambition for this project.
Thank you. Can I come back? My second one is when we get down to, let me see what the section's headed. We're in Appendix A, when we're talking about criteria. And towards the end, in terms of strategic impact, you know, we've put in essential and desirable. I'm delighted to see, particularly with my net zero portfolio hat on, that we've got, you know, the site must take measures to reduce carbon emissions, including improvements. I just wondered whether colleagues or yourself felt that in the desirable, we should be strengthening that a little bit. And again, it's respecting what the consultant's been saying. It's being open-minded. Let's not constrain anything. But also in desirable, you know, we should be doing the best in any new building to kind of work towards that kind of net zero type of design as a desirable, not constrained by, say, essential. I wonder if you'd like to comment on that, please.
Thank you. And absolutely, you know, this is, you know, how we would evaluate any proposals. You know, we would use the success criteria as a guide for evaluation of any future proposals. So there potentially be some weighing to this, and this is something that, you know, the next phase of work can consider, how much weighing we put to each of the criteria, and then, you know, members could decide, you know, which are the most important, which one is still important but maybe has a lesser weighing than the other ones, because, you know, definitely there's an ambition here that we want to deliver something impactful, And it's always, in the current market, it will be a trade-off, so at the end of the day will be a balanced approach, I would say.
Thank you, yes. It's basically, it's at a later stage when we start having some options. It'll be down to us to, assign the importance as we see fit. Yes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Demir.
Thank you, Chairman. Really following on, I was going to ask the same question as Councillor Hillier. In para 36, it actually says it's proposed we procure the works with a real estate agent, ideally with experience of seeking. I just need some assurance that the cultural side of it is going to be the main part of any brief, that I just worry about the words. But having said that, I certainly agree with the recommendation 3 that the member steering group is retained, because I think there we will get reflections from the Mid-Sussex local district people. But I never liked the word ideally.
I take your point, Councillor. Thank you very much. I think it's probably, my English, to be honest, how I phrased it. But the ambition is definitely, it's ideally what we mean here is ideally the estate agent will have that experience or will source it somewhere, in terms of Rachel's point earlier, that they would outsource that expertise if they don't have it. So definitely the expertise is really important. It's a cornerstone for us, kind of like key criteria to engage the next specialist help. To have, similarly to Bob, to be honest, fantastic experience around creative economy. And this is exactly what we'll be seeking from the next specialist.
Thank you. And we'll take the advice of Bob on who this broker might be.
Yes, so this concludes Karen's Bob assignment, this final report, and we will definitely stay close, aligned to Bob, because we really enjoyed the breadth of knowledge and expertise that we can tap to when talking to a partner like that, who's got both international and national expertise in this sector. So we'll definitely be continuing linking up with Bob on the next steps as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cromie.
Thank you. Looking through the case studies, the thing that struck me about the examples given is they all seem like landmarks in their local community or destinations. And I was particularly pleased that one of them was an example where there was a youth theatre for local children. So it there's a kind of breadth of different cultural offers, and in some cases there were many cultural offers in each of those examples. Is that a realistic ambition for us with Clare Hall, that it becomes a destination, that it services multiple parts of the community, but it's that can be the landmark of Haywards Heath?
Thank you, Councillor Cromie. I think that's a very important question, and it sort of partly speaks to what Councillor Salisbury was asking earlier as well, about why would you go for a cultural use as opposed to more broadly sort of local community use. And there's no doubt about the fact that those case studies we've shared with you, and in fact in our work as a whole, there is what you might call a cultural dividend to having a cultural anchor tenant or a core set of cultural activities. It has a sort of a halo effect in terms of, making you more noticeable, more distinctive, particularly if we're talking about a sort of independent activity. And I think that would be incredibly good for the town and how it sees itself and how it feels about itself. It also has very, very positive economic ripple effects as well, in terms of the ability to attract different kinds of visitors across different times of the day. And there's lots and lots of evidence out there about how cultural facilities in particular are going to be important in the future, about, that all of our high streets, we're having to kind of redefine what the hub of a town like this is. And I think that cultural use, particularly if you're framing it around the notion of sort of flexibility and relevance, that cultural use is going to be a hugely important, I guess, sort of chess piece for you as you think about the future of your town and your community.
Thank you. Just to add to this, this is, Councillor Cormier, this is also reflected in the success criteria, you know, and I think another point that Rachel keeps telling me, stay open-minded, you know, the market will deliver something, you know, creative, you know, in response to this. So that is the ambitions that we have, that we go to the market and hopefully the market will come up with something that we can be all proud of following our success criteria.
Thank you. Councillor Hillier.
Thanks, a quick one, and it is prompted by the answers and question answers from yourself and Councillor Salisbury, and I think it's a really good point about we wanting something, kind of use word iconic there. And I was just going to officers to get some comfort, because obviously we have in Mid Sussex a design guide that serves a purpose and serves us very well in many places, but I wouldn't want potentially anything being put forward to this site, certainly before members see it, that's going to be maybe constrained by some of the features of that design guide. Am I making sense? Because I don't want to be constrained by what we currently think about. Here's our designs, here's what we think looks good. Is that making sense?
Can I go to Judy Holmes, Deputy Chief Executive?
The council, as a landowner and as a body that manages its estate, has got to respect the rules of the local planning authority. So you will be bound by the same rules and regulations that bind any other developer in the district. The design guide is a supplementary planning document, so it will need to be taken into account because it will be material in any application. So obviously there will be planning constraints that will need to be carefully considered in any proposal that comes forward.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you. I haven't got anyone else indicating to speak, so I'll sum up and take us to the recommendations then. And firstly, Paul and Rachel, thank you very much for the work that's gone into the report and for coming here today. I think you've been incredibly helpful to us in terms of really helping develop our thinking, bringing the evidence to it and applying your own knowledge. And I think the work in front of us is really solid and has been really useful, and so thank you for that. And I think what I've heard is you know, cautious optimism. I think that's a good place to be in the current environment, but based on some real positivity about the site, about the location, about the audience, success criteria in the right place. And I think in Model 1 and Model 3 we've got some good options to move forward and take a brief to market. And when we started this work, you know, our goal was a modern, fit-for-purpose venue and a cultural anchor tenant to lead that. And I think we can see that beginning to take shape as we go through this work step by step. So that is really positive to see. So thank you for that. So I'll take colleagues to the recommendations that are in paragraph 8 of the report. So Cabinet is recommended to firstly note BOP's final report and carefully consider the recommendations, and we've done that. 2, to request officers to commission a specialist broker agent to develop a briefing pack as outlined in paragraphs 34 to 36. And this will include the process the Council should adopt to progress the preferred models, to Models 1 and Model 3, to maximise the opportunity to secure an appropriate cultural anchor tenant and partner for the site. And 3, to agree that the member steering group is retained to guide the next stage of the work. If I could ask members to vote on that recommendation en bloc, please. Thank you, and that recommendation is unanimously agreed. Paul and Rachel, you're very welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, but if you want to head off, we won't be offended. And thank you very much once again for coming. We'll turn now to item 6 on our agenda, which is performance monitoring for the first quarter of 2022-23. And this is going to be introduced by Catherine Hall, the Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't think I need to say too much by way of introduction, actually. You're all very familiar with this paper, bringing together as it does the performance from each of your portfolios, but it's always useful to look at the performance across the piece, isn't it? And see what the picture's telling us. The report does give you an insight into the useful debate that we had at the Scrutiny Committee a couple of weeks ago. It's summarised for you from paragraph 11 onwards. And to complement that, officers, colleagues have put round a little bit more information to members of the Scrutiny Committee, copied to yourselves, just to give you a little bit more background on some of the detailed matters that were raised there. So I hope that will help you in your deliberations. And obviously, if you've got questions, we'll be very happy to take them.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I open it up for any questions or comments. Councillor Belsey.
Thank you, Chairman. And I did attend the scrutiny meeting where the statistics were discussed, and I thank the scrutiny committee for their comments. Just to highlight a couple of areas within my own portfolio. Obviously, firstly, we've got the food waste trial going on at the moment. I think our current recycling rates are slightly ahead of target, but at 45–46% does show that the reason for the food waste trials to see if we can significantly increase those above that statistic. Obviously, the food waste trial is only going to be for the 3,000 houses, and so it won't in itself make that much difference. But I look forward, hopefully, to seeing some extrapolation of data as to what that would mean if we were to reflect that across the whole district. And of course, we will wait to see over time as to how that affects people's habits. And we hope that the amount of food waste being collected, which is still substantial even amongst the trial areas at the moment, see how that affects over time. I'm pleased to say that the feedback seems to be very, very positive in respect to the food waste trial, and I look forward to that in due course. The other area I just wanted to highlight, again, because I know it's one of the scourges that residents find in Mid-Sussex is fly tipping, and I just think it's really worthwhile noting that where we are responsible for collecting, so on public land, that we are collecting 96% of fly tips within one day. I think sometimes people don't realise how hard we are working on that. I think people also imagine that there's fly tipping going on everywhere. I was looking at the statistics earlier this year, and again, Mid-Sussex remains low for fly tipping compared to surrounding districts. But I'd like to thank our teams for all they do to try and remove those as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Belsey, for those positive updates, and really good to see, isn't it, the food waste trial underway in the district. 3,000 properties taking part in that at the moment. So look forward to more reporting on that in due course. Colleagues, any further questions or comments? Okay, if there aren't any, we'll go to the recommendations on page 69 of our papers. In paragraph 3 of this report, Cabinet's requested to note the Council's performance in the first quarter of the year and identify any areas where further reporting or information is required. So I think we're just noting that report. If I could ask you to vote on the recommendation, please. And that recommendation is unanimously agreed. That brings us to the end of today's Cabinet meeting. I thank everyone for attending. Formally close the meeting at 4:49 and just ask everyone to remain in place while the live feed concludes. Thank you.